Saloon brawls, high noon duels, outlaws who became legends. The American West left a deep mark on the country's memory. Tough men, sheriffs, and bounty hunters seemed unbeatable, but many stars of that time fell in very unexpected ways, sometimes crazier than any movie. Now let's lay it all out and show how these guys ended their lives outside the pretty stories. No beating around the bush. Big Nose Kate. Born in Hungary in 1850, Mary Catherine Horany came to the United States as a child and quickly learned that in the West, nobody survived by being weak. Still young, she learned to speak several languages, handle cards, booze, and dangerous men. She made a living as a nurse when she could, sometimes as a saloon girl, always chasing quick money and a bit of respect in a world that didn't care about women. That's how she crossed paths with Doc Holliday. The two lived between fights, rushed getaways, and long nights in Tombstone, with her cooking up excuses, hiding horses, burning documents to keep her partner out of jail. When Doc died, Kate didn't turn into some remorseful lady. She spent her quiet old age in boarding houses in the Southwest, telling the few curious folks how she'd seen the West be born and die right in front of her. Before she ever showed up on posters or in the papers, Annie Oakley was just a girl from rural Ohio trying to help her family put food on the table. Born Phoebe Ann Moses, she started hunting as a kid, selling meat and animal hides to help pay the bills. By her teen years, the reputation of the girl who never missed a shot had already spread around the area. That's how the chance came along that changed her life. In a simple hotel, the owner set up a friendly shooting match between her and a sharpshooter from a traveling show, Frank Butler. Straight rules. 25 targets tossed in the air. Whoever hit more won. Frank, experienced and confident, missed only one. Annie hit every single one. The room went silent. Then came laughter, the lost bet, the bruised pride. Frank couldn't believe it at first, then wanted to know who this young woman was who could outshoot him. From that afternoon came not just a stage duo, but a marriage that lasted 50 years. Touring the U.S. and Europe with Buffalo Bill's Wild West. Annie became a marksmanship icon in a time when almost no one took women seriously when it came to guns. At the end of her life, illness slowly drained her strength until she died of anemia in 1926. Less than 3 weeks later, Frank passed away too. In Ohio, the two are buried side by side, just like they lived almost their whole lives. John Henry Doc Holliday came into the world as the son of a respected Southern family and even graduated as a dentist, a serious profession for a young man who seemed to have his life on track. Tuberculosis changed all of that. When doctors told him he didn't have much time left, he did what a lot of men back then did. He headed west looking for dry air and maybe a second chance. Out there, he found out he could make more money at the gambling table than in a dental office, and that he knew how to handle a pistol. In tough towns like Dodge City and later Tombstone, he became Wyatt Earp's partner and ended up involved in the famous shootout near the OK Corral. To some, he was a loyal friend. To others, a dangerous man who didn't think twice before drawing his gun. The legend stayed, but his body couldn't keep up. In 1887, still a young man, he died in a boarding house in Colorado, far from the dusty streets that made his name. Jesse James grew up in a battered post-Civil War Missouri and became, at the same time, a hero to some and a serious problem for the government. He and his crew robbed trains and banks, vanished into the countryside, and ended up in the newspapers, while plenty of poor farmers saw in him someone who stood up to the big guys. On the other side was Governor Thomas Crittenden, under pressure from businessmen and politicians who wanted Jesse wiped off the map. When a job goes wrong and the gang scatters, his brother Frank tries to walk away and live a quiet life. Jesse doesn't. Already past 30, he keeps risking everything and starts bringing new people into the fold, including the Ford brothers. Charlie joins first, and Bob, younger and more ambitious, quickly realizes that all that fame could turn into easy money. Crittenden then throws out the bait, $10,000 for Jesse, dead or alive, plus a promise of pardon. Bob and Charlie take the deal. Months later, with Jesse living in their house, everything feels weirdly normal. One ordinary morning, he takes off his gun belt to straighten a picture on the living room wall. That's when, with Jesse unarmed and facing away, Bob Ford raises his revolver and fires, ending the legend in silence in front of a dusty wall. Belle Starr was never exactly the gunslinger the movies make her out to be, but she lived glued to the wrong side of the law. She got caught once stealing horses and spent less than a year behind bars. After that, she preferred to run with thieves, gamblers, and fugitives, people who lived with a gun on their hip. She married twice, and both husbands ended up dying in shootouts, like so many men of the Old West. Years later, riding alone down a dirt road, Belle was shot twice in the back and fell off her horse. The shooter disappeared into the brush and was never found. Some whispered that her own son Ed might have been involved, but nothing was ever proven, and the case turned into one of those stories time only makes bigger, not clearer. Even today, when people talk about outlaws, many remember her not for what she stole, but for the mystery of who decided to settle the score on that quiet afternoon. Billy the Kid went down as one of the most talked about gunmen of the Old West. His real name was Henry McCarty. He grew up without a father, always moving around, and by his teens he was already carrying a gun. In the late 1870s in New Mexico Territory, he got pulled into the Lincoln County War and went from poor ranch hand to a man tangled up in land and cattle fights. The law was weak, judges were for sale, and in that space Billy made his name. Babyface, quick trigger. As time went on, the number of dead pinned on him grew, and the reward on his head grew with it. Sheriff Pat Garrett, an old acquaintance, took on the job of hunting him down. He captured Billy, took the case to trial, and watched the jury sentence him to hang. It looked like the end, but in April 1881 he escaped, killed 2 deputies, and vanished into the desert. 3 months later, a tip led Garrett to the Maxwell Ranch. One July night, a figure walked into a dark room and asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" The sheriff fired before he was sure. He announced to the country that it was Billy the Kid. Ever since, plenty of people have claimed another man died there, and that the real kid lived on, keeping alive the question of where the story ends and the legend begins. When people talk about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, most think of the movies. But the real men were a lot tougher than Hollywood made them look. At the end of the 19th century, they led the Wild Bunch, a gang that treated train and bank robberies like planned operations. They studied schedules, routes, number of guards. Each job could bring in more than $35,000. Big money by today's standards. After the robberies, they'd disappear for weeks using friendly ranches and mountain trails. That kept sheriffs and detectives running in circles. With the pressure closing in, the two realized the game was getting way too dangerous and decided to try a new life far away, in South America. They ended up in Bolivia, pretending to be regular workers, until old habits took over and a payroll transport got robbed. The police quickly connected the dots. Surrounded by soldiers in a small house, Butch and Sundance traded shots until dawn. When the gunfire stopped, 2 bodies were found inside. Official records say everything ended that night, but for decades stories popped up about an American drifting through forgotten towns, keeping alive the doubt that maybe Butch found one last escape route. Calamity Jane was born Martha Jane Canary and grew up on the trails heading west. Still young, she lost her parents and had to fend for herself in a world where almost everything was decided by armed men. To get work and earn respect, she often dressed like one of them, rode for hours, drove wagons, hauled freight, and, some say, even carried messages as a fast courier. Over time, she became a scout for the army, helped during smallpox outbreaks as a sort of nurse, and learned that courage could pay better than a steady wage. Later on, she joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, shooting and riding in front of crowds who wanted to see the stories they'd already read in the papers. Outside the arena, though, the bottle spoke louder. Drinking, which seemed to soften the roughness of the road, ended up taking its toll. At 51, she died worn out after years of heavy alcohol use. She was buried near Wild Bill Hickok. Many people back then said he hardly paid her any attention, which only added to the feeling that the Old West wrote its own final chapter for a woman who never quite fit any label. At the end of the 19th century, William Buffalo Bill Cody became a well-known name across the country. His business wasn't movies. It was a huge show that toured the United States and Europe with a staged version of the Old West. In the arena, you'd see riders, sharpshooters, and groups of native people cast as either enemies or allies, all set up to show a rough West full of room for men willing to take risks. On January 10, 1917, after decades in that routine, Cody was in Denver visiting his sister when his body gave out. He died of kidney failure. That's where the part people still argue about begins. In his final will, he supposedly chose to be buried on top of Lookout Mountain in Colorado, a spot with a broad view of the plains. But winter was harsh, the mountain was covered in snow, and there was no safe way to take the coffin up to the summit. The solution was to keep the body in cold storage for months and repeat the embalming, while relatives, politicians, and locals fought over the fate of the old showman. Folks in Wyoming argued he should go to the town of Cody, which he helped found, and which was mentioned in an earlier will. In the end, the official burial happened on the Colorado mountain, and local guides say he's there. Even so, stories circulate that one night someone secretly took the body back to Wyoming. To top it off, the old Olinger mortuary in Denver, where the coffin stayed for about half a year, later became a restaurant called Linger, as in staying around, not leaving. A fitting name for the memory of Buffalo Bill, which still hasn't found full rest and continues to intrigue anyone interested in the Old West. Bat Masterson was born in the dust of the plains and grew up in a time when a lot of fights were settled from the holster. As a young man, he was a buffalo hunter, gambler, and hired gun, until he earned a reputation as a cool-headed guy who didn't shake when it was time to shoot. That's when his path crossed with Wyatt Earp's. Earp saw that Bat wasn't just another gunman. He was someone who kept his head straight when everyone else lost theirs. Dodge City, Kansas was a loud town full of saloons and trouble. They called Bat in to help bring order, first as a deputy, then as sheriff. He arrested thieves, pulled bullies off the street, and when needed, drew his revolver without hesitation. He earned respect, but paid a high price. He saw his brother Ed get shot and killed in one of those street fights, right in front of him. After that, the shine of the West started to fade. Near 50, tired of funerals and of living in someone's crosshairs, Bat did what many only dreamed of. He turned the page. He moved to New York with his wife, became a newspaper sports writer, and even served as a federal marshal. In October 1921, sitting at his work desk, he collapsed right there in the middle of writing a piece. After all the gunfights and dangerous nights, the end came quietly in a newsroom, closing the story of one of the last men of the Old West.